On today's episode of Speak Shame with Dr. Connie Corrali.
It took me a long time to think of myself as a journalist because I kind of felt like I was faking it. I wasted so much time feeling insecure. Just don't waste energy on that because, you're never going to solve the question of whether you have the skills or the innate talent or whatever. Unless you do it, you're not going to solve that question in your head. So you just need to go out and try and do things.
Hello, remarkable woman. I'm your host, Dr. Connie Corrali, medical doctor, life coach, and survivor of sexual violence. And you're listening to Speak Shame, a collection of inspiring conversations with remarkable women who have faced and overcome adversity. By sharing their stories, my hope is that you may find strength, connection, and hope in your own journey, and that shame itself loses its power. So sit back, relax, and don't forget to follow the show. Joining me on this week's episode of Speak Shame is the remarkable Rachel Hartigan. Rachel has written about everything from the genetics of permasun trees to the long road to women's suffrage for National Geographic, where she worked as a writer, reporter, and editor from 2012 to 2024. A former editor of the Washington Post book world, Rachel also covered education and culture for US News and World Report. Her book, Lost, Amelia Earhart's 3 Mysterious Deaths and 1 Extraordinary Life, unravels one of history's greatest mysteries, exploring 3 leading theories of Amelia Earhart's tragic disappearance. So thank you so much, Rachel, for being with me today.
I'm so glad to be here.
And what we will do, just so that our listeners can get to know you, start off with one of my favourite questions. So that question is, if your life story was turned into a book, could you describe for me what would happen in chapter 1?
Oh, in chapter 1, it probably would show a little girl who was always reading and looking for stories. I grew up in Reno, Nevada, in the Western United States, which is very deserty, but also very suburban. And I loved being out there and out in the desert, but I also was just so enraptured with books and our family's yearly vacation to this Shakespeare festival that happened up in Oregon. And the combination of those two things have always made me very interested in stories and telling stories. I didn't end up becoming a playwright or a novelist. Instead, I became a journalist, telling stories in different ways. But it took me a while to figure out what job I could have that was combined learning and writing and gave a reason for a shy person to talk to people, which interviewing and reporting does. That's sort of the brief synopsis.
I love that. And I could just imagine you being surrounded by books and being lost in the world of stories as well. That's beautiful. And you touched upon this journey to becoming a journalist, a reporter, and how it took a bit of a while to get there. Could you describe maybe a little bit more about that journey as well?
Well, I majored in history in college, and there's not an automatic career pathway from a history major. I mean, I would argue for it, but still, I didn't know what to do. So I moved home. I tried working as a paralegal at a legal publishing company. I ended up working for the Nevada state legislature, editing bills, which was not my dream. Then one day, I think my dad was getting a little fed up, and he had picked up a copy of Harper's Magazine. And I think I was sitting in the living room and reading, of course. And he just held out the magazine to me, and it was open to a page that said interns wanted. So basically, he told me I had to apply for an internship. And it hadn't even, I was so clueless. I knew nothing about anything. So I ended up applying to this internship at Harper's in New York City and got it. And that was really my introduction to journalism. Although I had a short job as a just like an assistant at a cowboy magazine in Nevada, but that was not there you go, nor there. So that was how I sort of found my way into the magazine world. But it took me a long time to think of myself as a journalist because I kind of felt like I was faking it. Like I was definitely trained on the job and I didn't really know what I was doing for a long time. But I did manage to sort of find my way from that job to a job in Washington, D.C. that was connected to the Library of Congress. And that was wonderful because, the Library of Congress holds every book that's ever been published in the United States and many that have been published elsewhere. And we had free access to the stacks, which is amazing, and all the special collections. And it just, it opened my eyes to all the things that one can write about. It doesn't have to be just news. It can be something that, has been around for a long time, but not a lot of people know about. So from there, this is also the parallel story of journalism. That magazine was bought and then closed down. And I went to another magazine about um, nonprofit work. That was closed down eventually. I went to a magazine on education. That eventually was closed down. But then I ended up at US News and World Report writing about education and culture. And from there, I went to the Washington Post. I had had a baby and they had a great part time job. But after a while, I somehow managed to find myself being the editor of the book section for a while. And then journalism being journalism, I was laid off and finally found my way to National Geographic, where I was for 12 years. Um, and that was another job National Geographic covers everything in a way from its own specific geographic lens. And it was a great way to follow my curiosity and learn about things that I hadn't even known to be curious about. So it was very, very rewarding. But definitely my career path revealed my lack of planning and foresight because I just kind of found my way from here to there.
No, I love it. And I'm sure there are people out there who can relate to that as well. And potentially also people who are looking to get into the career of journalism and are thinking, okay, that's all right. It doesn't have to be a straight path like that. And
Right.
you mentioned that for a while you felt like fake it till you make it. And I wonder then when you started to call yourself a journalist or when you started to believe in yourself that, yes, I am a journalist.
I think it started at US News. In a way, this is going to sound very grandiose, but a way I think it started with September 11th because I had been there. How long had I been there at that point? A couple years. Yeah, a couple years. And I was covering education. It was mostly US News does all these college rankings and is sort of something that every college kid looks at or high school kid when they're applying to colleges. So I was really more doing that kind of stuff. So I didn't feel necessarily like news journalism. But then on September 11th, all of a sudden, we were in Washington, we could see the smoke coming from the Pentagon where the plane had crashed, and everybody was dispersed to report on what had happened. And granted, what I was doing was not very glamorous. I was just basically calling college campuses and seeing how people were reacting. So I was not running to the Pentagon. I was not running to the Trade Center, but I just all of a sudden I felt like, oh, this is an all hands on deck situation. We all have to do our part. And I guess that means I'm a journalist like everybody else here. So that's when I really started to feel part of it, despite my very small role in the coverage.
But I can imagine as well something so life changing for you or for everyone. Such a
Mhm.
significant moment. Everyone remembers where they were, and
Mhm.
I can completely understand how you feel like yes, you're part of the team, and
Mhm.
and you've described obviously all the different magazines that you've worked for, and then making your way to National Geographic, and you described this curiosity
Mhm.
that you was able to flourish there. And I wonder what sort of stories were catching your eye, or what sort of things that you found most fascinating.
The first story I did when I got there, I mean, one thing I should say is I was excited to go to National Geographic, but I was thinking, wow, I have not done all the things that a lot of the people there have done. I have not, traveled with nomadic people in the Sahara, or as my colleagues have done. I've not worked on archaeological digs, all these things. So, to sort of calm myself down about it, I had a little post-it that wrote, just say yes to everything. And so my first story was, I didn't have to travel for it, but it was about this photographer who had gone around in mostly Eastern Europe, looking at people who dress up for um, events like Christmas and well, what we call here Mardi Gras, and these traditions that were very old, people dressing up like beasts or like just all these things that don't happen so much in the US except for in New Orleans, but almost this pagan dressing up for these holidays. And it was so strange and wonderful that I was just thinking, well, I have to this is not just a straight reporting job. I have to really bring that wild feeling to what I was writing. And it was a very short piece, but I realized that I could bring something to it. So that was one piece. I ended up doing National Geographic at the time didn't do a lot of profiles, but I ended up sort of gravitating towards doing some profiles. So I profiled a guy who was starting to patch together land in Montana, North Dakota area between state parks and national parks and ranch land so that there was enough land for buffaloes to roam and other migrating animals. So I went out there and interviewed him and saw his organization release all these buffalo calves they were huge out into the wild. So I think the through line for a lot of what I was doing is people who were doing really interesting and surprising things. That was what I was really drawn to. Not so much the nitty gritty of science, although I did do some of that, but much more focusing on the people who are doing the work.
Yeah, it's lovely. And I really appreciate you as well saying that when you started out there, there was that, I guess, maybe worry is one way to name it, of, well, all these people have
Mhm,
done all these different things and I've not done that. So I love that you had that post-it note that just said, say
mhm,
yes to everything, because it's something that people will relate to as well.
mhm.
And then you talk about obviously being drawn to people's stories. And I wonder what you learnt about yourself during those years of reporting.
Well, I learned I could, for the most part, put people at ease when I was talking to them. Um, I learned that I don't really have any interest in taking people down or saying, "Oh, this person's a fool," or anything like that. I really don't feel comfortable with that. I also don't wanna, build people up more than I just wanna present their story, like, to be almost a channel for their story with some, um, critical perspective, and I don't mean critical negative, but just more like analysis and looking at the importance of whatever they're doing or the impact. Um, I learned that I can write, that it's lots of people have a hard time with it, but like it's one thing I know I'm good at. I mean, I'm not a poet, I'm not Toni Morrison. I'm not, but I can explain complicated topics. And I learned also that for me, the communication part of writing is really important. One thing that was really one of the best lessons, even though it wasn't glamorous at all, is for a long time I worked for the front section of the magazine, which writes a lot of short pieces. So you have to explain complicated things like, I wrote a piece about genetic potatoes that was maybe 200 words long. So you have to, every word counts. It's almost like poetry, but it really embeds this idea like you have to communicate this, that you're not writing the story for the person you're writing about. You're not writing it for yourself necessarily. You're writing it to convey a story to the reader. And that is something that's always become increasingly important to me, is to think about, well, who's on the receiving end of this? I'm not trying to get any social points for writing this story. I'm trying to impart information, but also impart, I don't know, the emotional base of of
Mm.
somebody's story to the reader.
I think there's something very human about that connection,
Mhm.
that we may be very
Mhm.
different. We may be talking about different things and living different lives, but it's that
Mhm.
emotion, I guess, that connects us. So I completely understand that. And
Yeah.
you have gone on to write a book
Mhm.
about Amelia Earhart, and I wonder what that journey was like. W- Have you left journalism, or is it something you're doing in tandem? If you could maybe describe what's happening there.
Yeah. Well, it started out, I mean, I didn't really know that much about Amelia Earhart, but it started out because I was assigned to go on an expedition that National Geographic was covering. And this expedition was going to an island where some people think she may have landed and then died a castaway. Earhart, disappeared in 1937 when she was almost done with a round the world flight. And she disappeared flying from Lae, New Guinea to this island called Howland. And about 400 plus nautical miles south of Howland, there's this island, Nikamororo. That's where I went on this expedition where people were bringing human remains sniffing dogs to see if they could find any remains. And so this was what I mean, this was the biggest thing I had done for National Geographic. I was going to the other side of the world. We were taking a ship, like a 5-day sail from Fiji. This island was really in the middle of nowhere. I had to file my stories with a satellite phone. It was all very new to me. And it was very exciting and I loved it. Even though I got seasick, I discovered that I get seasick. um, so it was a great adventure, but it was part of my work at National Geographic. And then 2 years later, there was another expedition to this island. This time, the expedition again, it was funded by National Geographic. Geographic made a documentary about it, and this expedition was led by Bob Ballard, who is the man who found the Titanic. And so it was a kind of a very high tech searching underwater mission around this same island. And I wrote a bunch of stories from there as well. And then after I got back, I was very pleased with the stories I wrote. I said, oh, I can do this. I can file these stories from the middle of the Pacific and people will read them and it'll be great. And after I got back, realized that this agent had been trying to contact me all this time while I was gone. And she was saying, this would make a great book. And I was like, really? I'm not sure because they didn't find anything. And it took me a while to think of, well, how do I tell this story? This woman who disappeared and people are still looking for her. And there are all these conflicting theories about what happened to her and people who have spent decades of their lives devoted to their theory. um, how do you tie all that up into a book? And it took me a while to figure out how to do that, but eventually I did. And I was still working for Nat Geo. But then, I mean, there were changes at the organization that made it a little bit harder to work at. And I had some deaths in the family, and I just ended up being really burnt out. So I left Nat Geo to finish the book. And so now I'm a full-time writer and editor.
We never know what opportunities are going to come
Oh, yeah.
in life. And so I love that you were just like, okay, well, I'm not too sure, but actually, let's do this. And
Mhm, mhm,
the title of the book is Three Mysterious Deaths and One
mhm.
Extraordinary Life. And I don't want to say not give too much away because obviously we know a bit about. Obviously, it's no spoiler alerts
Right.
going on here.
You're
But I
right. Still don't know
wonder
where she is.
what fascinated you the most about Amelia's story.
At least here in the US, we tend to learn about her during Women's History Month. In elementary school, there's always some little girl who dresses up as her for Halloween. She's held up as a hero for women. Um, and I didn't know that much beyond that, but I started to, read more and more and realized how ahead of her time she was, not just in the fact that she decided to become a pilot in a time when, aviation was new and it was incredibly risky. And B, that it was mostly men who were doing it and men who were being trained through the military. So there was much more of an easy passage for men to learn how to be pilots than women. But also just how much she embraced everything new, how much she valued her freedom to do what she wanted to do and not what society necessarily wanted her to do, just in terms of gender roles. I would say towards as she got famous, she was more stuck in what society wanted her to do because she was now, the charming, brave Amelia Earhart. So she had to play that role. But and I had around the same time I had written a big feature about the centennial of the women's vote in the US, and that was 1919. um, and just that whole time period and all the that were happening just really fascinated me about her. And then with the theories, I realized, as I started to find out more about them, that they were all tied into their historical moment as well. Um, And, just to give a quick rundown of the theories, the first theory is that she ran out of gas. She got lost, ran out of gas, and crashed into the ocean. And I should say she had a navigator, Fred Noonan, with her. That always gets forgotten, but he also was on the plane. The other theory was the one that I had gone on the expeditions for, that she died a castaway on an island. And the third is that she either got lost or was a spy, ended up in Japanese territory and was captured by the Japanese and either died or was killed in their custody. They're all kind of different theories, and they all intersect with really big historic transit. I mean, the Japanese theory in particular, because, just 3 years after she disappeared, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, and then, thousands and thousands of American soldiers were sent across the Pacific, fighting island by island against the Japanese, and it developed really strong animus towards the Japanese. So they were ready to believe that they, could do something as terrible as finding a lost aviator and then killing her. Although there really is no concrete evidence that that happened. And then the castaway theory is tied up with British colonialism because right after Earhart disappeared, Nicaragua was made a colony by the British. They moved a bunch of people from what was then called the Gilbert Islands there. And that's when some bones were found on the island that, some people think might have been Earhart's. So that all ties in. Just all these kind of side stories really fascinated me. So,
Yeah.
and I couldn't get into them really beyond superficially when I was writing news stories. So a book
Yeah.
is much better for that.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And I'm intrigued as well. I'm like, well, I need to go and get that to figure out.
Right, right.
But I think, as I said, so many people have heard about her, but to explore this angle to it and really look into these different theories is fascinating. And one of the
Hmm.
things that interested me as well is about obviously how she went against societal norms
Hmm.
and really was a groundbreaker. And wonder if it makes you reflect on where we are as a society today, how looking back at your own life as well, about the impact that you're having. What was your reflections as you were writing the book or as you finished writing the book?
One thing that I thought about a lot is people were always asking her, well, why are you doing this? Why fly solo across the Atlantic? Why fly from Hawaii to California? When she flew solo across the Atlantic, Charles Lindbergh had already done it, but nobody else had done it after him. People kept trying and they died. But, a lot of people saying there's no reason to, it's just, you're just risking your life. And she really, she was a little flippant about it. She would say, because I want to, or for the fun of it. But I think underneath that was this feeling like I don't want to have to explain myself. And men don't have to explain themselves. So why should I have to justify what I'm doing? And I thought about that a lot. And obviously, things were very complicated for her. She needed to make these big flights so that afterwards she could go on these lecture tours and actually make a living. The flights didn't give her a living. So she kind of had to do it in order to fly the way she wanted to fly. But just the idea of not having to explain your desire to do something or the fact that you're going to do something. Definitely a challenge for me, but I do, um, it's a real challenge for me actually, but, but I do try to think of that. It's like, well, there's no reason, nobody cares, or there's no, if I want to do this, it's not necessarily selfish. I mean, obviously, it could be selfish if all of a sudden I was like, said see ya to my son and just traveled the world and didn't see him for 2 years. I mean, he's 21, so he would survive, but it's still very helpful to think that you don't have to explain your ambition. You can just be ambitious, or you don't have to explain why you want to travel. You can just travel. It just seems very applicable and unfortunately a timeless problem for people,
Mm.
particularly women, I think.
Absolutely. And I think that so many people will be able to relate with that than feeling like they have to over explain in order to
Mm-hmm.
justify what it is that they're
Mm-hmm.
doing. And so yeah, I wonder what your plans would be then now. So you've written this book and it sounds amazing. Is there someone else, another person that's maybe taken your fancy as someone to write about, or are you looking at a completely different path?
Well, I'm thinking about, and I have done not too much research on it yet, but there's sort of from the same era. There was a building in San Francisco that a lot of artists and writers lived and worked in, including Dorothea Lange, the photographer she's a photographer during the 30s who took a lot of pictures of the Dust Bowl. But all these people coming in and out during this period of really economic and cultural upheaval, but they were interacting with each other. And I'm thinking about diving into that and seeing how these people influenced each other. We'll see. I mean, yeah, I mean, you never know where the research
Yeah.
leads you, but that's kind of what I wanna get into next.
Yeah. No, I love that. And for our listeners who maybe there's someone who wants to get into writing, or wants to be a journalist, wants to write a book, and perhaps they haven't made it to where they want to be yet, or don't feel like they're
Mhm.
quite good enough to do that. What would your advice be maybe to someone like that?
Well, I think you get better just by doing it and you never know what you're going to learn from anything. Like I said earlier, writing these short pieces for the front of the magazine, I thought, oh, this is so lame and just not glamorous in any way. But I think it really made me a better writer. So if you really want to write, if you want to do journalism, you just need to say yes to all opportunities and keep an eye open. I mean, journalism right now is really tough. There's so many fewer jobs, but I am very inspired by all these smaller organizations that are opening up, even coming out of. I know a guy who's created this almost journalism network in rural Virginia. There's smaller places where you can really have an impact, and they're small enough that you probably get a chance to do a million different things. Um, that I think that experience is invaluable.
Yeah, brilliant. I think people will be making notes there and realizing that actually, no,
Mhm.
just saying yes, as you
Yeah.
described. And I wonder, Rachel, if you look back at your younger self and maybe before your dad shows you that
Mhm.
magazine
Yeah.
with the
Yeah.
internship, what would you say to your younger self now that you've reached this point in your life, if you had to pass on words of wisdom to younger Rachel?
Oh boy. I mean, I would tell her, you wrote a book. Believe it or not, you're going to end up writing a book. But also, um, I wasted so much time feeling insecure and just don't waste energy on that because like you're never going to solve the question of whether you have enough the skills or the innate talent or whatever unless you do it. You're not going to solve that question in your head. So you just need to go out and try and do things. So I would just urge her to try everything.
Yes, I love that. Oh, that's brilliant. And
Mm.
as we come to the end of the podcast, I want to invite our listeners to get the book and follow your work. And where is the best place that they can find you or get the book?
Probably the best place is my website, which is rachelhartiganauthor.com. It has links to where you can buy the book, and it also has links to my social media. I should say I'm not huge on social media, but I am there.
Okay, brilliant. I will put that into the show notes so that everyone has that. And is there
Okay, great.
anything that you think, oh, actually, I just wanted to mention that before we finish? Do let me know.
One of the reasons I wrote the book is I just wanted people to remember that Amelia Earhart was a person and a person with a family that grieved her when she was lost, and that, these people that we hold up as icons are actually real people and that we need to keep that in mind.
Absolutely true. And the final question that I always ask my guests, it may be Amelia, but the question basically is if you had to name one remarkable woman who has inspired you, who would it be and why?
I was raised Catholic and had to pick a saint for confirmation. And I read through the book of saints, and all the female saints had been either martyred or died virgins. So it's like, I don't like any of that. So I picked this one saint, Batildus. Nobody's ever heard of her, who was kidnapped by pirates and then somehow became a queen and then became the head of a convent. So I picked her because she wasn't a victim in any way. She just made the best of her situation. So and that was a long time. I was when I was 12 or 13, and I don't know. That's kind of
Yeah.
what I've held to.
Matilda's, I'm going to read up about her as well. That could be another story. But
Yeah, that is another story, actually.
Oh, well, Rachel, thank you. Honestly, thank you so much for joining me today. And I really appreciate you taking the time. I'm looking forward to reading the book. And yeah, thank you for being with me.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been great.
Thank you for listening to Speak Shame with Dr. Connie Corrali. And thank you so much to Rachel Hartigan for being my guest on this week's show. Please take a look at the show notes for information on Rachel's social media handles so that you can connect with her. If you'd like to join the community, head over to @Dr. Connie Corrali on Instagram. If you're a remarkable woman who has been silenced by shame and you're ready to reclaim your voice, then join me at my next free Shame Resilience workshop. You'll find the booking link in the show notes. And finally, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast to get a new episode every other Thursday. Until next time, take care.